Well, hi, I'm Vivian Kubrick, and I made this film 23 years ago when I was 17. And it feels like about a million years ago. And first, actually, I started in the art department the year before, and I was about to leave, and I think my dad wanted to keep an eye on me, so he sort of suggested that I made a documentary on the making of the film. So, and I'm really glad he did, actually, because it was really cool learning how to do this. But anyway, this is Jack's dressing room. This is Jack being incredibly civil, given the fact that I've just barged into his dressing room. But I think, actually, probably because I was so young, and I guess I lacked some credibility, it just sort of put everyone's guard down, and they were all very relaxed about me being in there filming them. So him, shoving his shirt into his trousers, and me sort of, my usual, following my own train of thought, panning down, and anyway, but I think probably also the other thing that contributed to my lack of credibility was the fact that I pushed my camera around in a children's preambulator, or whatever they call them, a pram. But it was actually brilliant. I highly recommend it to anybody. Now just here on the side of my camera you can see my sound equipment hanging off, and I'm just about to tell you something. My camera, the first camera I started with was a Bolex, which was a really bloody noisy camera, and that would have been hopeless for sound. And so I then moved on to this gorgeous 8-on, which you saw in the mirror there. And I had this Nagra SN, which ran an 1/8 of an inch cassette-sized tape and was actually developed for the CIA. And but when I first had it, the whole thing was also trussed up like a big turkey with leather straps and buckles and everything, and it was really a pain in the arse to unload. And Garrett Brown, when he turned up on the film, who's the inventor of the Steadicam, who's rather genius with such things, took a look at it and kind of, took it all to pieces, and with a couple of strips of Velcro and a bit of super glue, suddenly turned it into this fast action unload, load sound camera setup. So, Garrett, I thank you very much for that. It made my life much easier. Right. What am I going to talk about now? Oh, God.
Why don't you get some shots of me when I'm great looking?
So, all the dressing rooms and makeup rooms and stuff encircled the stages. And we're just leaving Jack's dressing room now. And you'll slowly see that we're going out into these scabby, dirty, old, messy corridors. Actually, this one isn't too bad. And we're going to go downstairs, and that leads straight onto the stages. And it's always something that's bothered me. I wore clogs. I guess it shows you how lax I was getting by the end of the film. So I'm clumping down the stairs here, making a hell of a lot of racket. But anyway. So you can see how nice and tidy it is off stage. And now we're going on to the set that is the lobby in the hotel. Now, you can see it's all sort of dark and all the lights are turned off, but when they weren't shooting, they did that because it would get blazingly hot on the set. If you can believe this, there was no air conditioning on these stages. So if you turned all the lights on, it would just heat up like a big old oven. Now, here we are going towards this rather motley crew, all sort of rather disorganised in the side here. There's Shelley on the right. Now this is Dan Video. He's gone off screen. But poor old Dan Video was the there he is. Was the old sort of punch bag on the film, because unfortunately it was the very earliest time of video, and he had this big old U-matic machine, and they were using it for the first time as playback, and it rewound and wound forward about sort of a third of the speed that it did when it played. So he was endlessly being sort of thrashed for not having it lined up in time. Right, this is Jack warming up. Actually, this was a shame. In the original BBC broadcast of it, you weren't allowed to say fuck. So we had to sort of reverse all the sound and bleep things out. But we managed to restore what we could of the swearing. Big deal. But it now sort of seems awfully kind of prudish to kind of bleep things out. But I'm glad we got rid of them. I actually spent a great deal of time sitting around rolling my eyeballs around in my head, because often there were like rehearsals which I wasn't party to, because, you know, it's a very kind of difficult time, and it would have been quite ridiculous if I'd been stumbling around, crawling all over them, filming them. So this is the exterior set, which actually, if you can believe, that was all salt. And it was up on the studio lot. It was a section of the Timberline Lodge, which had been, which was an existing place up in Colorado, and we built just a section of it. Now, this is funny. Jack actually trained as a reserve fireman, and the chippies who were, you know, asked to build like 23,000 doors for him to axe down, thought that, you know, because he was a film star, he'd probably not get through them very well. So they kind of made them easy to smash apart. And rather ridiculously, Jack went through them like they were like matchwood, and they had to go off and build some strong doors, and Jack had to kind of back off because his technique was quite powerful.
You're in the scan. All right. Okay. Good boy.
Oh, no, this thing's really cool. Garrett is sitting on something that was created because at the time Garrett hadn't got a way of getting the Steadicam to go low enough and still have latitude to go up and down. And so they came up with this idea of him sitting on a wheelchair. And in fact, all the shots of Danny in the film where he's like tricycling around or whatever he's on, that was all done with the Steadicam with Garrett sitting on a wheelchair. And I think this was like maybe the second or third film or whatever. Garrett will probably have to hit me on the head for saying that. I'm sure a lot of the facts that I say in this will be wrestled to the ground afterwards. But I think it was one of the early films that the Steadicam was used. That's Leon Vitali. He played Bullingdon on Barry Lyndon. That was when my father first met him. And Leon went on to work with my dad a great deal, in fact, right up until his death. And afterwards, he's been much part of the restoration work done on my father's films. And he always helped my dad with the actors, and he did a lot of preparatory work with Danny, and actually was a part of the whole auditioning process of, you know, the little guys that came to audition, just not actors, just kids from all over America. It was a massive audition. Leon did most of the interviews, and I think that's probably the flavour of this whole documentary, is because everybody was pretty relaxed about it. They were very frank, and I think Leon made that easier. I mean, particularly with Danny, because he worked with Danny so much. So, Scatman, darling Scatman, knew every song that I think had ever been written in the 20th century, and was often completely unable to remember his lines. But he was a great guy, my God. I think he was in a lot of big bands in like the 20s and 30s, and he was quite a character. He was a bit overwhelmed here.
Able to work with such beautiful people. I'll never forget this.
This kitchen set used to be, prior to the shooting, an area where they were painting, if you can believe this. They actually painted all of the designs on the floor in all of the sets. I don't think anyone can even imagine the attention to detail. But anyway, next door to this set was the art department. And the studio was very much used in every capacity imaginable, and not always were sound stages used. They would just kind of go, hey, this could be the kitchen. And so, in fact, this was not a sound set. It was a bit of a pain, actually, because it would often cause sound troubles.
Just like they can see things that haven't happened yet.
What about this kitchen? Not terribly much to say about this kitchen, really.
I think a lot of things happened right here in this particular hotel over the years. And not all of them was good.
This is the way.
Margaret Adams, who ended up being, I think, working on production manager on Eyes Wide Shut, she actually started out as my father's secretary. And she was elected to type up all those billions of pages of all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. And in fact, I think she spent literally months typing up individually unique pages which ended up in the film. So if you're wondering who slaved over those, it was Margaret. But anyway, here they are learning their lines, and Shelley's doing this with Michael Stevenson, who was one of the assistant directors, and he was fabulously reading it flat. In fact, I often think about this with actors, is that they're faced often when they're on their close-ups with continuity girls or assistant directors reading the other lines, and it's like hopeless, sort of line reading, nothing to play off of. But I think very often in important things, Jack would always be reading his own lines off camera, because it is hard. If you have someone going, Wendy, the snowcat in the radio, and, it's a bit off-putting. It's my dad trying to make use of the time.
It might be better to just play it as a medium shot with the situation. The other thing, maybe.
Stay there. Can you do it with your head down? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's not bad. Let's do that. Try that, Jay.
Wendy, listen to me. Let me out of here and I'll forget the whole damn thing. It'll be like it never happened.
You couldn't find some way of sort of not looking at her and looking down as you say the line.
I think generally the kind of atmosphere on the set tends to be a little bit like being on a kind of construction site. People are kind of, setting things up, and you're sort of organising stuff, and it's relatively low-key, and you're trying to push things along and get things going. But the only time that it really gets hardcore is when there's a lot of elements to control. When it ever gets serious in terms of acting, because there's stuff that you're trying to get on film and it's not happening, generally the crew just sort of quite naturally drifts away from the set, and you just end up with the core of the crew, which was my dad, the cameraman, and the actors. Now, in this particular sequence, it sort of, it rather tickles me that I actually ended up shooting, you'll see it's coming up, that you see the crew, filming Shelley, but that's actually the take that appears in the film. And call me a simpleton, but for some reason that gives me a great deal of pleasure, that this is actually really what people were doing in that shot that you see of her in the film. Good old Kelvin Pike there. Now, if you can see, he's not got his eye to the camera, which is pretty handy, because they're using this video monitoring thing, which was the first time my dad actually used this, and it provided a tremendously useful method of watching the takes back, because you sort of anxiefy as to whether you've actually got the take. And sorry, I've invented that word. Anyway, but you get very anxious about whether you've actually gotten the take. And with video playback, you could really very quickly assess whether, you like the composition, whether you like the performance. And it saved a lot of unnecessary printing of takes, which is incredibly expensive. I mean, when you think how much it costs to process a 36 roll of film, imagine that times by about 10 trillion. And you've got how much it costs to process film for a film. So it's really handy to not have to print things. That's a bit of fill light there. That's my dad cradling the light, with a little diffuser there as well. People are often surprised when he's finished this whole take and he just sort of goes, and just sort of goes straight out of character. But I think actors somewhat pride themselves on being able to sort of snap out of their performance. But Jack's amazing. This is June continuity. Now, I've known June since I was 8 years old, and she was slavishly always shorthanding down all the various rehearsals and turning up with sort of scripts where they had to learn their lines, and Jack has obviously become a bit weary of this process. Anyway, they'd always learn their lines on the day, which was a bit naughty. That's my granny, my dad's mum, and she came to visit. Yeah. Oh, my granny always loved all that. Her apartment was plastered with every award and every photograph I think that had been taken of my dad. Yeah. They're actually just talking about all the different versions of the script that I've done.
But of course, you never have the latest
Blue or
version.
yellow isn't significant. It's just colors.
I quit using.
The only like pang of nervousness I had was when I first met Jack. And I remember that I was rolling my film and sort of, like nearly dropped my camera a few times. Because, unlike anybody, Jack was this really, sexy film star. And so you get all kind of like, beside yourself. But I mean, he is a character and he's a really sweet guy. And, it doesn't take long to kind of calm down. Now this, actually, James Mason, who worked on Lolita, and he was working next door, I think on some period thing, in a stage next door, and he came to visit with all his family and friends. There's old James and his wife there on the left. And actually, this is actually quite a rare occasion. It's just really because it was James and his family, because there were never visitors on the set. That was always something that I think, it doesn't really work often having visitors come on the set, because it kind of breaks everybody's concentration and you kind of start socializing instead of filming. I have to say, having watched this film a few times, I've really been struck by how very sincere Shelley has been in this whole thing. I mean, I sort of took it for granted when I was making this, but it was very cool because she really spoke very frankly and truthfully about her experience. And I think that, in any creative situation, there's so many dynamics going on, and often those dynamics really interfere with what's going on. It's very hard for it not to. And film sets are sort of like kind of a nerve-wracking, endless party where everyone has to sort of be shining constantly, and it doesn't sort of work out after a couple of weeks. Everyone's getting a bit threadbare, and all their colours and various bits start hanging out, and it's a very interesting alchemy of interactions, largely in order to get the work done, and then sometimes just I don't know. I have to say that without Shelley, I don't know that this would have been as interesting.
Yes. Oh God, thank God I came out.
I would try and follow what my eye would have naturally followed had I just been standing there, which is often why I kind of pan down to people's, crutches or something. I mean, crutches, I mean. Or I like pan down to their hands, or I just put the camera where I would have been looking had I actually just wanted to see something. And I think that was about the only conscious thing I actually did. And the rest of it was just, wandering about and wafting in the hope of opportunistically catching something.
From May until October, I was really in and out of ill health. Because
all I was ever thinking about was trying to not fall over and get the light reading right. And sometimes I would interact with people because there were specific things I wanted them to show me. And sometimes, invariably, I suppose people used me as a way of recording their own perspective, like when Shelley's moaning about her hunks of hair and my dad sort of takes these 3 follicles up 2 inches from the lens, that this was his own, I want this recorded. Actually, I have to say, Shelley had a hard old time because she pretty much, once it got into the major core of the film, she almost had to constantly be in a state of hysterics and crying. And it was, if you can see just a little bit on her face, she's got this glistening. And after a while, she ran out of tears. So she was almost permanently daubed in glycerine because it was about the only way she looked like she was crying. And this is my dad trying to sort of ruffle her up into a bit of activity, and she's feeling a bit sorry for herself. Shelley received no sympathy at all. She really got a bit of a sad old deal from people, but she was a real old trooper. And now this maze, actually, if you believe something as sad as this, people actually got lost in this maze. And they had to be led in with a map. Really, it's almost like Spinal Tap. People would disappear. Crew members would be sort of shouting across, trying to get in. Now the whole set was rather sad bits of what once were alive bushes that were all sprayed green because they all went sadly brown, and salt and smoke. And it was actually quite, I think it was, for a while it was a concern there that all the sets well, particularly this outdoor set, nobody had any breath coming out. But it was because it was actually, these sets were bloody hot. In fact, it's interesting. On Full Metal Jacket, it was absolutely freezing all the time. And all the actors, and we had to get rid of their breath. And they had to pretend they were really hot. And on The Shining, they were supposed to be really cold, and it was like interminably hot on all the sets. And everyone was like throwing off their sweaters in a panic after you'd taken a shot. And this is a bit of mood music coming on for little Danny. Danny often had music as a thing to react to, and The Rites of Spring really did it for him. If you remember, that's that bit of music that's in Fantasia with the dinosaurs. Oh no, for anybody who can't quite remember it, in its original form, which was a ballet of all things. Here's Garrett. If you can believe it, Garrett is an amazing musician. And he often used to serenade us all in the camera room with my banjo. The other thing that was almost endlessly a drama was getting rid of the footprints and then trying to sort of resettle the salt so it looked virginal. What can I tell you? God, you'd never know they'd been sprayed green. Look at it. I suppose they sprayed green under like masses of like caked on whatever it was on there. And this is beautiful, sweet Danny, who was so intelligent and so remarkable, given the fact that he was really young and had never had any training at all in acting, and worked so concentratedly and so dedicatedly with Leon at home when he wasn't shooting. And he was... I think he decided not to go into making films anymore after this experience. Not that it was a bad one or anything, but I think he probably had other aspirations, but he was brilliant. Now, this interview was actually done by Ian Johnston, who I think he was the only official interviewer that I had, and I think he did a pretty good job. It's a shame, you know, because at the time, Warner Brothers didn't really know what I had, and although I'd shot a tremendous amount, I was restricted to making this, you know, just over 30 minutes long, and it had to contain a lot of clips because that was the only format that Warner Brothers could work at. But there was so much footage, and it's a shame, really. Anyway, this is one of the rare moments of that I actually included in the documentary of some kind of directorial stuff.
Come and look at it, Shane. The only part clearly wrong was at the end when you said we've got to get him out of here, as you got strong at the end, and I think it has to be a last desperate begging, you know? And I still think you shouldn't jump on every single emphatic line. It looks fake. It really does. It looks like you, Shelley, I'm telling you, it's too many times. Every time he speaks emphatically, you're jumping, and it looks funny.
So he says, I'll put on my Superman suit.
No, I think...
Actually, whenever I see this shot, I remember my lab sheets that I used to get back. Nobody actually saw any of my rushes. And because I was sort of learning how to do things, I was going along. If ever I got a lab sheet that came back said, you know, some shots out of focus or underexposed, I'd practically like screw them up and eat them because I was like terrified anybody'd see them. But I think as it goes, most of it was in focus. But that was one pretty bad bit of focusing. Oh, there we go, finally.
The lines are going to make an awful lot of difference if you get the right attitude. I think you're worrying about the wrong thing. Can we just have a quick chat about it once more, shall we?
Jack! There's someone else in the hotel with us. There's a crazy woman in one of the rooms. She tried to...
Now, Shelley and Jack spent probably a year in those clothes, which is actually quite a surreal experience for most people. They had about maybe 5 or 6 copies of it in case should they sort of dump their lunch on it during the break or something. But yes, they trundled around in those for quite a time. And afterwards, when films end, you often sort of rifle through all the remaining wardrobe. And in fact, I then took over that shirt and that little thing for a while. You think I would have been sick of it, but there you go. Now, this was something that was an ongoing process. Was trying to sort of choose music while the film was being made. And anyway, they happened to use this just in the ballroom sequence to get all the sort of dancers all sorted out in time for the shooting day. These are all extras who I all find sort of fabulously exemplify Englishness to me. I particularly love this woman coming up. She's sort of rod-like in her dancing. There she is. Oh, God, this was like at the crack of dawn. Everybody getting ready for the big shoot. Extras. When you have a lot of extras, it's always a drama. And usually over things like tea breaks, food, you know, people getting ready, setting them up.
Morning, Viv.
Do you know, it always bothers me that I never said hello to that woman, but I was really concentrating and I was half asleep.
That where it's comfortable and then...
Sorry to interrupt us. Could we have a...
This is very funny, actually. Extras really take pride in their work, and they, of course, like to be near the camera, and, of course, these people are going to be shuttled even further away from the camera, so they're all a bit miserable about it. But it was always done with tenderness, because everyone knew that that was a bit of a tough one to say to an extra. Now, just here in the background, it's Leonard of London who did the hair, and then there's my mum on the left there with the hat on, John Olcott in the middle, and then my auntie, Maria, with another hat on. This is obviously hat fashion day. And so my mother's beaming away there, and my dad's telling all the extras not to nod their heads. And this ghastly bit of carpet was actually specially designed for the film, and I think does the trick well. It is a really nasty bit of 70s carpet. And in the background there, you can see the dancers, and they were all wearing hearing aids and listening to a radio transmission of the music they would dance to, so that there wasn't any noise actually being recorded on the day. And I'm actually in the scene. In fact, I'm coming up on here on the right in a black dress, sitting next to my friend Kira in a white dress. And in fact, I spent the whole day operating my camera and getting sort of white pancake makeup all over it. This is Joe Turkel. He was in Paths of Glory. He played Lloyd in this sequence.
There's that pressure on almost every movie set, and it's here as well. It's just Stanley doesn't relate to it because he is doing exactly what he thinks he should be doing at that moment about it, you know, sort of very single-mindedly. He's emotional on the set, you know.
Those were aircraft propellers, sort of chucking loads of smoke on the set, and this was the day before anybody really had terribly much environmental conscientiousness, and in fact all of that was polystyrene chips, and that was spread far and wide across the great village of Boreham Wood, which is where my studios were, which was received with gratitude by the local inhabitants. But anyway, that was like 20,000 gazillion tons of polystyrene chips.
Roll video. Video speed, Stanley.
And it was actually very frantic, because you cannot imagine how difficult it is to control elements that you are dumping into a very large area where, you know, any blast of wind and suddenly the smoke goes and the wind blows somewhere else and the polystyrene goes. And then what happened is, you know, in all the kerfuffle and trying to set it all up, Shelley didn't come out on time. So she gets a good old bollocking here. That thing was ginormous. I don't know if you can appreciate how big that was, but each hopper was like sort of like half a cement truck. This is Michael, who was endlessly diplomatic on behalf of my dad, and was looking a bit worried there. Anyway.
Oh, come on. What do you mean?
I always think it's rather funny if she comes out with a knife here.
So we play mood music?
No, I can't.
Yeah, but when you came out like this...
There is something kind of comically, like, grappling about all these things in filmmaking where you all struggle to get to the finish line, and it, you know, really at the end of it, once you've got it, everyone just sort of relaxed and would sort of like laugh, and it was as if nothing had happened. But on the way to trying to get the shot, you know, invariably everyone would get into a completely like, you know, fretful, pissed off, mad state, and then you'd get it, and then everyone would be really happy and all friends again. I mean, I would say also there's a lot of fun on the set, and people are generally very high-spirited and always cracking jokes, and, you know, and people that work on films are really cool people and really fun and interesting. When there's like a day where you've got a lot of extras, it's a lot of excitement, particularly if you get to don a costume, which often, like, you know, crew members tend to get hoiked in to sort of play something. And I always like to kind of sidle in there somewhere in my dad's film.
Successful actor, you can't have one set of theories. You know, you can go for years saying, I'm going to get this thing real, because they really haven't seen it real. You know, they just keep seeing one fashion of unreal after the other.
Actually, I think I'm not quite sure when I'm going to take the opportunity to tell the story of this fire. There's probably not even got nearly enough space on this documentary for all these stories I keep telling. But there was a giant fire, and this entire set here was destroyed, along with a couple of stages next door. And ridiculously enough, as the documentary director, I was in London transferring interview tapes of Jack, and I missed the whole thing, and I woke up to the phone ringing and people saying, oh my God, I heard there was a fire. And I said, don't be ridiculous, I'm the documentary film director, I think I'd know if there'd been a fire. And after about the fourth phone call, I sort of leapt into my car and promptly crashed into a police car and never made it to the studio. But it was terrible, and it was one of the few days that it actually snowed in England, which was a disaster for the exterior set because it was all made of salt, so that was slowly turning into a slush pool as the rest of it was up in flames. And so there was quite a few heart stoppers on the film of like near total disasters. But God, yes, at the end of the film, when they were timing or grading, depending on where you are, there were these two giant cell scratches, which was direct damage, major direct damage to the original negative. And of course, the set had been burnt to a cinder. And I went into the screening room and there was just these stony-faced men from Denham Laboratories in a state of complete terror. And miraculously, they managed to wet-gate print the sequence. But if you look at old DVD, if you look at an old DVD, not this new restored version of the films, or any old video, you can still see the old cell scratches. And that was definitely a bloody black day when those turned up. But anyway, they all got fixed. Now, very soon is a piece of music that's going to come up, which Wendy Carlos actually wrote for The Shining, but although my father really loved it, there was actually nowhere to use it. So, being an opportunist, I leapt in there and said, well, then can I use that bit of music because it's really beautiful? And in the restoration process of this documentary, the original, if you can believe something as horrible as this, I actually used a cassette as the master. But in the old days of mono, nobody would have really heard how horrible that sounded until we got it up onto modern digital equipment, and it just sounded absolutely bloody awful. So you're now going to hear a pristine, gorgeous version of this music, which I think is now playing. But I really love this bit of music from Sibelius. I just was so happy that I could use it. Also, I couldn't think of a bloody way to end the documentary. So... God, shouting. So this was a very kind of neat way to find some way of ending this thing. Now, I'm having a rather hard time finding some way of ending my commentary, but I do hope that you've enjoyed listening to me yammering away for the last half an hour, and it's been a pleasure.